Two ships, one ocean, 128 years apart. In 1784, a 20-year-old German boy crossed the Atlantic toward America. The story goes that nearly everything he owned traveled in one bundle, about $25, and 7 flutes to sell. Then, in 1912, his great-grandson stood on the deck of the largest moving object human hands had ever built, the richest passenger on the Titanic, worth, by some estimates, $87 million. A private suite, a young bride, a servant for every need, the modern king of an empire that began with those flutes. One crossing created the greatest fortune in New York. The other crossing took its king. Between those two ships lies a tale of beaver skins and ballrooms, of a family that came to own the ground beneath the richest city on earth. So tonight, one question burns in the fire. How does a boy carrying 7 flutes end up owning New York? Hear that? That's my fire settling in, which means it's time. Pull up a chair and get comfortable. I'm Daniel Reed, and tonight we are sailing on 2 ships at once. Here's a strange footnote to our last story by this fire. J.P. Morgan, the banker who once stopped a national panic, held a reservation aboard the Titanic's first voyage. He canceled it. The richest man who did sail is where tonight's story ends. Where it begins is a muddy village in Germany, in 1763, with the youngest son of a poor butcher. Walldorf was a small place of farms, carts, and church bells in the German southwest, and Johann Jakob Astor was its butcher's son, the youngest boy in a crowded, struggling house. Blood, sawdust, and debts. That was the family trade. One by one, his older brothers escaped. One reached London and built musical instruments. One reached New York and cut meat, like their father. The youngest waited, worked, and at 16 he walked out of Walldorf with a bundle on his back. His road ran first to London. For roughly 3 years he served in his brother's instrument shop, saving coins and, just as deliberately, collecting English. Word by word, sentence by sentence. He would need that language more than any tool he ever owned. In 1783, with the American War barely ended, he bought his ocean passage. The story is told that the crossing was brutal, months at sea, and then weeks trapped in Chesapeake ice within sight of land. But below deck sat an unexpected teacher, a fur trader, and the young man peppered him with questions night after night. What skins sell? Who buys them? What does a beaver pelt cost in the wild country? And what does it fetch in London? By the time the ice finally broke, the boy with the 7 flutes had chosen his future. Not music, fur. America offered him the bottom of the ladder first. New York in 1784 was a war-scarred town of cobblestones and church spires. And the story goes, his earliest wages came from peddling bread and cakes in the street. Soon a fur dealer hired him for filthier work, beating dust and moths out of raw pelts, labor so foul that gentlemen crossed the road to avoid the smell. He refused to stay at the bottom. He learned every grade of skin by touch. He hiked and paddled into the wild country upstate, trading with native nations along the rivers, sleeping under his canoe, hauling pelts home on his own back. Polite society smiled at his heavy accent and his stained hands. He let them smile, and kept counting. In 1785 he married Sarah Todd, a merchant's daughter who brought a dowry of $300, and, as the story goes, a sharper eye for fur than his own. He trusted her judgment above anyone's, and said so. Together they opened a little shop, flutes and violins in the window, pelts in the back room. Season by season, skin by skin, the pile of coins grew taller. And then a single ship changed the mathematics of his whole life. In the year 1800, a vessel carrying his furs reached Canton, in China, and returned loaded with tea and silk. When the books were balanced, that one voyage, by some accounts, earned him more than $50,000. Years of shopkeeping, collapsed into a single round trip. A door had swung open onto the entire planet. But the real spark, the idea that would outlive him by 2 centuries, was quieter than any ship. Walking the muddy lanes north of the little city, Astor saw something invisible to nearly everyone else. New York could grow in only one direction, up the island, onto the farms and orchards that merchants dismissed as worthless countryside. One day, he reasoned, streets would run through those cabbage fields, and whoever owned the dirt would own the future. So while rivals bought carriages and country houses, he quietly bought ground, farm after farm, lot after lot, and he almost never sold. He leased, letting the growing city pay him rent forever. Friends whispered that the fur money had made him strange. The strangeness was simply a plan, with a horizon of 100 years. Fur built the engine. In 1808, he founded the American Fur Company, and within a generation, it had become something America had never seen. A private empire of hundreds of traders, forts, and river routes, answering to one man. Let's be honest by this fire, because this fortune keeps a dark ledger too. His company was accused, with good reason, of flooding the fur country with cheap whiskey to squeeze better prices from native trappers, and of crushing every small trader in its path. The money that bought Manhattan was not clean money. History owes us both truths. Then, in 1834, he did what almost no rich man manages. At the very peak of the fur trade, he sold all of it, and moved everything into New York ground. Rents rolled in like a tide. The newspapers found him a nickname, the Landlord of New York. By the way, Astor never gave anything away if he could lease it instead. This fire works differently. The stories are free, the chair is yours, and one tap of subscribe reserves it for life. Rent, 0. He died in 1848 as the richest man in America, worth around $20 million, the country's first great multimillionaire. And on his deathbed, the story goes, he offered one final regret. Could he live life again, he would buy every foot of the island of Manhattan. His heirs took the advice. What they built with it would touch the sky and the gutter. For 2 generations, the plan worked coldly and perfectly. His son doubled the ground rents. His grandsons doubled them again. But by the 1880s, the Astor name stood over 2 very different New Yorks. In one New York, Caroline Astor, the Mrs. Astor, ruled a ballroom that, as the famous claim went, held exactly 400 people, the only 400 in America who mattered. Across town, in the other New York, families crowded into dim, airless tenement blocks, and some of the worst of them stood on Astor ground, feeding rents up the Golden Pyramid. Reformers wrote it plainly: the grandest fortune in the city was partly built on its poorest rooms. Then the family began to devour itself. One cousin, William Walldorf Astor, insulted and outmaneuvered in the endless social war, tore down his own mansion and raised a towering hotel beside his aunt's home, almost, it was said, out of spite. Her son answered with a taller hotel next door. Only a hyphen made peace between them, the Waldorf Astoria. William Walldorf sailed for England for good, reportedly declaring America no fit place for a gentleman, which left the American crown to one man, Johann Jakob Astor IV, inventor, colonel, builder of hotels, freshly divorced, freshly remarried to a bride of 18, and frozen out by the very society his family had invented. In the spring of 1912, sailing home from a long honeymoon spent escaping the gossip, he and his young pregnant wife boarded the new ship everyone called Unsinkable. You already know the night. The 14th of April, 1912. Ice, starlight, and slowly tilting decks. Astor helped his wife Madeline into lifeboat number 4. Then, witnesses said, he asked the officer, calmly, almost politely, whether he might join her, given her condition. The answer was no. Women and children first. Some accounts say he passed her his gloves. Then the richest man on the ocean, worth more than the ship beneath his feet, stepped back from the rail and stood among the other men, obeying a rule his millions could not bend. Madeline survived. He did not. Think of the strange symmetry the fire shows us here. For 128 years, the Atlantic had carried this family toward its fortune. That April night, the same dark water quietly closed the account it had opened, an account that began with a bundle of 7 flutes. Yet here is the strange arithmetic of the Astors. The king drowned, and the kingdom kept his name. Count what remained. The boys' $25 had become a family that, by some estimates, held hundreds of parcels of Manhattan ground. Astor Place sits in the heart of the city, and down in its subway station, the tiled walls still carry small portraits of a beaver, a quiet joke about where the first dollars came from. Say the map out loud, and the family answers. Astoria, in Queens. Astoria, in Oregon, on the far Pacific coast, where his fur traders once raised a fort. Even the Walldorf salad, born in the family's own hotel. And the greatest twist stands taller than all of it. In 1929, the old Walldorf Astoria was torn down, and on that exact patch of Astor ground rose the Empire State Building. The most famous tower on Earth stands where a family quarrel once built 2 rival hotels. One more surprise hides in the tight-fisted landlord's will: money for a great free library. That collection later flowed into the New York Public Library, where the marble lions still guard the books today. Later, Astors pushed the rent money further toward charity, trying to balance the old ledger. The English branch collected titles. The American branch faded from the throne of wealth. But the first Astor's real bet, that the ground outlasts every owner, has never once been wrong. Remember the 7 flutes? A butcher's son could not carry money across that ocean because he barely had any. So he carried things that could become money, a trade in his hands, questions for any stranger who knew more than he did, and a language he had spent 3 London years learning, word by word, before he ever touched American soil. The flutes paid his way. The English made his way. And that, my friend, is where this story crosses the water to you. You are making a crossing of your own right now. And this English, sentence by sentence, night by night, is what you are carrying in your bundle. Nobody can tax it. Nobody can flood it. No iceberg can touch it. So trade like young Astor did. Ask one more question than feels comfortable. Learn one more word than you need today. Speak one sentence out loud tonight, even to an empty room. Lease your evenings to learning, and let the years pay you rent. Ships sink, ballrooms empty. What you carry inside you reaches the far shore every single time. Before the fire burns down, one question tonight. Young Astor bet everything on land, while the men around him chased gold. So tell me, in one word, which would you trust, land or gold? Drop your answer in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're listening from. I read every single comment by this fire. If this story earned it, subscribe. You bring the chair, I bring the history. And next time, the ballroom strikes back. While American fortunes rose, a fleet of American daughters sailed the other way, trading dollars for crowns and castles. One of those New York girls would become the mother of Winston Churchill. Who were the dollar princesses? Pull up a chair and find out. The fire's still warm, and there is always a chair for you. I'm Daniel Reed, and this is Fireside History.